Okay, this is another MCA 7th grade lesson, and today we're talking about algebraic addition. And it sounds kind of complicated, but it's really not too bad. What it is and what it deals with is our positive and negative numbers again. And what we're going to be doing is actually adding and subtracting those positive and negatives. We've already added negatives together, now we're going to subtract. Now, why is this called addition when we're going to be talking about subtraction? Well, we're actually going to be turning our subtraction into addition, and I'll show you what that looks like. When we do that, it makes things a bit easier to work with. Okay, so the first thing that we want to think of are opposites today. For instance, they give us -3 and +3. Those are opposites of each other. And when we add opposites together, we get 0. So -3 plus +3 gets us 0. And this is why we say that 3 and -3 are opposites of each other. So 3 is the opposite of -3, and -3 is the opposite of +3. Okay? So we want to keep the idea of opposites in mind today. So knowing that, we can read -3 as the opposite of 3. So furthermore, the negative of -3 can be read as the opposite of the opposite of 3. So this means that -3 is another way to write +3. Sounds kind of confusing. This is what it looks like. Okay, so the opposite of 3 is -3. The opposite of -3 is 3. So that's kind of what we're thinking of. When we see minus, we're thinking the opposite of that number. So if we minus a negative, basically what we're thinking at and what we're looking at is we should get a positive. Okay? So this means the opposite of the opposite of 3. The opposite of 3 is -3. The opposite of -3 is +3. So it's a funky way to write +3. Basically, like I said earlier, or a few seconds ago, two negatives next to each other come out to be a positive. They kind of cancel each other out. Alright, so there are two ways to simplify the expression 7 minus 3. So let's take this very simple concept, 7 minus 3, and we get 4. That's the way we normally do it. 7 minus 3 is 4. Everyone knows that, or at least most of us know that. The other way to do it is to turn this into addition. Now I'll show you what we mean here. We can always turn subtraction into addition. So we can do 7 plus the opposite of 3. So if we add the opposite of 3, it's the same thing as taking 3 away. Okay? So 7 plus -3 gets you to 4 as well. And you could try both of those on your calculator and they should both get you to 4. 7 minus 3 will give you 4. 7 plus a -3 will give you 4. So we can turn subtraction into adding the opposite each time. Okay? So let me erase that. And what I have highlighted here, well, let's look at this. The second way is to use the thought process of algebraic addition. To use algebraic addition, we let the minus sign mean that -3 is minus 3 is a negative number, and we treat the problem as an addition problem. So just like this, like I showed you before, 7 plus -3. So whenever you see a minus sign, you can consider it a negative, because adding a negative is the same thing as subtracting. Alright, so just one more time to think about it. Instead of 7 minus 3, think of adding the opposite, 7 plus -3. Alright, just want to make that clear. Okay, so we can also use algebraic addition to simplify this expression, 7 minus -3. What they're going to do is use an addition thought and think that 7 is added to the opposite of -3. So this is what we think. 7 plus the opposite of -3. Well, the opposite of -3 is +3. Opposite of -3 is +3, so we can write 7 plus 3. And we get 10. Now, if you don't want to try to remember all this opposite stuff, which I think helps, but if you're more of, okay, I want to look at that and I want to solve it right now, just know that if we have this situation, it's going to turn into a plus. Okay, two negatives next to each other, 7 minus a negative. If we're ever subtracting a negative, it's going to turn into a positive. Or if your answer might not be positive, but it'll be 7 plus 3 and we get 10. There will be situations where we still get negatives. For instance, negative 10 minus a negative 2. Okay? Here we have negative 10 and we're minusing a negative, or if we change it to addition, add the opposite, so add the opposite, which would be a positive 2. So now we have negative 10 plus 2, and we get negative 8. So you can still get a negative answer, but this situation turns into a plus. Two negatives next to each other. Okay. So basically, we get 10 for this answer. It looks weird, but when we think about it a little more, it makes sense. So let's take a look at a couple here. We have negative 3 minus negative 2. So we have our situation. We can add the opposite, turn this to addition. But if we turn this to addition, we have to do the opposite of this one. So really we have negative 3 plus a positive 2, or negative 3 plus 2, which is a negative 1. 3 minus 2 is 1, but we have more negative than we have positive, so it has to come out negative. Here, before we do that one, oops. Remember, you also could have just seen this situation and said, oh, that's going to turn into an add, negative 3 plus 2, and you still would have got the same answer. Okay, let's look at this one now. I'm going to turn all the subtracting into addition. Okay? So this means, remember, the opposite of negative 2, which is 2. Or see that we have two negatives next to each other, it's going to be a positive. So it's going to be positive 2. And I'm going to change this to minus, or I'm going to turn it to addition. So plus the opposite of 5, which is negative 5. And then I'm going to answer this quick. Mr. Gibbs? Yeah. Yeah, I'll be there in a second. Yeah, bye. Alright, I gotta go help someone in a second here. So let's get through this example, and then we'll call it good for now. So we have positive 2, turn this to addition, add the opposite of 5, which is negative 5. And we're going to turn this to addition, we're going to add the opposite of 6. The opposite of 6 is that. We also could have done 2 minus 5 minus 6. Okay, that's another way we could write it. Either way, we should get the same answer. Positive 2 plus a negative 5 is a negative 3. Plus a negative 6, that's going to come down to. And a negative plus a negative gets us more negative, we're at negative 9. So we'll get this one. 2 minus 5 is negative 3. And then minus 6 is negative 9. Okay, either way we get the same answer. So this turned positive. We could have thought of it as minus 5 right away, and then minus 6. Okay, if you minus a positive, it's the same thing as just subtracting normally. But I like to turn things into addition and add the opposite. Makes it a little bit easier. Alright, so that'll be good for now. This is something we will see on the MCAs. So whenever we see this situation or any sort of subtraction, we want to make sure we add the opposite. Alright.